Hello, people! One of the main appeals of the Pokémon franchise is its flexibility and diversity. Different people can enjoy Pokémon in wildly different ways, even within the same piece of Pokémon media. In this video, I'll be going over some of the types of Pokémon fans that I've noticed in the community over the years. It should be noted that this video is not intended to poke fun at anyone, but rather showcase the many varied ways in which Pokémon can be enjoyed. It's an exploration into the mass appeal of the IP and a celebration of its fanbase. Also, it is perfectly possible and even probable that someone fits into more than just one of these tropes. The competitive player. The competitive Pokemon meta is insanely intricate regardless of format. It's basically a whole other game within the main game. Competitive players make full use of every mechanic that can play a part in battles, from basic things like movesets and typings to slightly more in-depth features like natures, IVs, and EVs. Many of the aspects that competitive players have to think of don't even occur to the more casual players who mainly engage with the single-player content of Pokemon games. I find it genuinely impressive that competitive battlers are able and willing to wrap their head around and keep up with the shifting meta and all of its mechanics. The casual player. So-called casual players make up the majority of the fanbase. These are the people who play the main story of Pokemon games but don't necessarily worry about stuff like having an optimal team or using the ideal strongest mons. These fans simply want to enjoy the game and catch their favorite Pokemon. They're more fun-oriented, but that makes total sense. Games are meant to be fun after all. And the Pokemon world has a plethora of enjoyable characters, locations, and stories that you can delve into without getting into the nitty-gritty details. The Challenge Runner. Challenge runs only sort of blew up in recent years, but the ever-popular Nuzlocke has been around for longer. Much like competitive players, challenge runners enjoy, well, challenges. They want to test their battling skills, but rather than fight other players, they prefer to push the difficulty of the main campaigns of Pokemon games to their limits by adding self-imposed restrictions and seeing if they can beat the game under extreme, usually tough conditions. These challenge runs are obviously quite popular on the internet. It's impressive how well some of these players know the games and how quickly they can adapt to and overcome challenges. The Shiny Hunter. Shiny Hunters dedicate the majority of their time playing Pokemon to obtaining shinies. Many shiny hunters try to optimize their methods and hunt for shiny Pokemon in the most efficient way with the highest odds. These are called method hunters, but full odds hunters deliberately choose to not raise their likelihood of finding a shiny through special methods and keep them at base odds for increased satisfaction and rarity. Many shiny hunters on the internet like to stream their hunts, and some are known for their bombastic reactions. I find the shiny hunting community wildly interesting because it started off as a niche offshoot of the fandom, made up of the few people that even knew what shiny Pokemon were back in the day, but now shinies are common knowledge and their implementation in the game side media and merchandise is made very obvious. Even the term shiny was a fan term at first that later became official. The nostalgic fan. This is the kind of Pokemon fan that enjoyed Pokemon in their childhood but perhaps fell off in later years and has now returned. These fans tend to mainly be familiar with the early gens of Pokemon, most often Gen 1. Perhaps they got back into Pokemon through Pokémon GO, or the financial success of some of the recent Switch titles, or they simply missed something that they grew up with. Although they may not have the deepest understanding of the franchise, nostalgic fans might be open to learning more about the games and generations that they missed out on. A lot of what the Pokemon Company produces appeals to this demographic. After all, everyone knows nostalgia sells. But don't take this to mean that these fans are necessarily superficial. I think it's beautiful that so many people are eager to reconnect with their childhood. You don't need to be familiar with every aspect of Pokemon to be a fan. The lore enthusiast. Lore enthusiasts are the fans that are most interested in delving into and researching the Pokemon world. They like to pay attention to all the in-universe details of Pokemon stories and lore and often end up formulating their own theories about this fictional universe. The lore and inter-game narrative of Pokemon can be quite ambiguous and at times inconsistent. Creating a super cohesive timeline just isn't a priority in most Pokemon games, and so, a lot of the time, it's up to the fans to fill in those blanks. Sometimes it's connections that simply add up and make sense, but other times fan theories can be super creative. Sometimes fan theories are so popular that some people accept them as canon. A lot of lore enthusiasts also tend to be knowledgeable about the real-life inspirations for Pokemon and the Pokemon world. The TCG fans. Fans who enjoy the Pokemon trading card game can be split into three main categories, though the three often overlap. There's the players, the people who are actually interested in playing the game, understand its rules and mechanics, and may attend official competitions. There's the collectors, people who enjoy collecting their favorite cards, admiring the beautiful art, and trading with others, but don't necessarily concern themselves with what the cards do. And then there's the investors, the people who try and acquire the most valuable cards and card products to sell them for profit. Some people are into the card game without being into the video games. The anti-Poke fan. Anipoke is just a nickname for the Pokemon anime. Just like the TCG, it's big enough that it has its own fanbase somewhat separate from the fans of the games, meaning that there's people who watch the Pokemon anime but aren't necessarily super into the games. An abundance of people, including myself, were first introduced to Pokemon through the anime, so it's no wonder that it has a special place in many of our hearts. One thing I find appealing in the anime over the games is that it's got a more cohesive timeline and continuity. Personally, I really enjoy Pokemon Horizon so far, with all of its anime original characters that aren't in the games but are amazingly designed and entertaining to watch. The most prevalent Anipo community members tend to have a presence on YouTube. Also, shout out to the Pokespam micro community. You're the real ones. The Go player. Another branch of Pokemon that has its own independent fanbase. Pokemon Go players overlap somewhat with the previously mentioned nostalgic fans. Some of them aren't very familiar with the broader Pokemon franchise and the main series games, and so they may lack the context behind some of the features present in Go that come from the main series games. In spite of this, the Pokemon Go community really came into its own. I find it impressive that it rivals the other main branches of Pokemon despite the fact that Go hasn't been around for nearly as long as the mainline games, TCG, or anime. In fact, Pokemon Go is so big that parts of it influenced or are reflected in the main series as well. The artist. One of my favorite things about the Pokemon community is that it's full of amazingly capable and creative artists. From people making Fakemon to musicians remixing or covering Pokemon OSTs to the developers of fan games and ROM hacks. I mean, it's even a joke in the community that whenever a new Pokemon character is revealed, there's people making and posting art of them in a matter of minutes. An astonishing amount of Pokemon artists create stuff that rivals official media. Many of them mastered the so-called Sugimori art style and can now draw things that genuinely look like real Pokemon official art. When it comes to fan games and ROM hacks, these people have it rough. Making video games requires a lot of time and effort, and the fans working on that can't legally earn any money since they don't own the Pokemon IP. In addition to that, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company often take down these fan projects and make their development more difficult. In spite of the hardships, these fan developers persevere, and some of them went on to make their very own original creature collecting games, which I find quite inspiring. The Superfan. This category of Pokemon fans is defined by their sheer devotion and interest in the franchise. These are the people who not only love Pokemon, but also create resources to be used by other fans like fan websites and the internet archives. Superfans make an effort to preserve Pokemon media and make sure that as much information as possible is available and accessible to the rest of the fanbase. Many of these fans have been around in the fandom since its inception in the mid to late 90s, and they now keep up with all of the latest news and developments about Pokemon. Even my own videos would be much harder to create without dedicated places where I can source information, images, and music from. As you can clearly see, the Pokemon franchise has something to offer for nearly everybody, and its fanbase and communities are incredibly diverse. I love a lot of the spin-off games, but I didn't really touch on that. I wholeheartedly believe that Pokemon can be a wonderful source of fun and inspiration and could even help foster bonds between people. One of my goals with this channel right now is to make videos that are in-depth enough for dedicated fans to enjoy, but also broad enough that people new to Pokemon can learn something from them without getting confused. In other words, I want to contribute to the existing community, but also potentially create new fans. With that being said, I totally understand that Pokemon as a franchise is far from perfect, and choosing not to engage with it because of its problems in recent years is a completely valid position to take as well. Well, thanks so much for watching, people. Let me know what kind of fan you are, or if I missed any. Comments are good for the channel, but I'm also genuinely interested to hear where you stand in relation to Pokemon, so do tell. Goodbye now.